Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make an apple pie, and this is what it looks like. This has 2 layers of a buttery, crisp pastry, and then in between we have lots of lightly sweetened apples. So the first thing we're going to start with is to make our apple filling. So you will need 3 pounds, which is about 1.3 kilograms of apples, which is about 5 large. So, you know, we go to your grocery store and just pick 5 large, or sometimes they have a scale and you can actually weigh them. I also like to buy like at least 1 extra apple just in case there's some bruising. And then we need to peel our apples. Some people like to use just, you know, a vegetable peeler, or you can actually buy like an apple peeler. But I'm going to show you how I do it. I take my apple and I just cut it down and then cut it on either side of the core and then across the bottom like so. And then I just peel it with a sharp knife. And if you have a, you know, always wash your apples, because if you have a little bit of peel, that's okay, you know. And then I'm just going to slice it into about 1/4 inch slices, which is about 0.6 centimeters. And then I've already done it because you don't want to watch me do all that. So what kind of apples do you use? First, you want an apple that has a firm texture, because as it bakes, you don't want it to break. You want it just to turn soft. You don't want it to become mushy. And I like to actually use an apple with a bit of tartness to it. I just think that goes so well with the pastry. So year-round favorites that you can normally find in most grocery stores, you know, my favorite is like the Granny Smith. You have Honeycrisp, another favorite, Brayburn, Gala, Golden Delicious. And in the fall, when you go to, say, if you go to a farmer's market or you like to pick apples, you know, get regional favorites. So once you, and also, I like to not use just one type of apple. I typically use Granny Smith, but today what I've done is used a couple Granny Smith, and I used 2 Honeycrisp, really like those. And I also used a Gala. So, and that really gives your apple pie a complexity of flavor. So now, in a large bowl, I have all my apples. So then what I'm going to add is 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, freshly squeezed, please. And just toss that. And that'll prevent our apples from turning brown. And then what you want to do is sugar. You know, I've already added the lemon juice, but typically always taste your apples first, because, you know, that will depend how much sugar you want to add. Mine are a little tart, but not too bad. So what I'm going to add is 1/4 cup, 50 grams of granulated white sugar. And then I'm going to add 1/3 cup, 65 grams of light brown sugar. I like the 2 sugars. I mean, you could just use 1 type if you want. Put that in there. But like I said, if yours were a little sweeter, you could use a little less sugar. Conversely, if you're using a real, you know, kind of sour apple, you might want to add a little more. And then I like to ground cinnamon. I just have to have that, so I'm adding 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And then 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of salt. And I also like to add a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg. Whoop. Not a lot. You know, maybe 1/4 teaspoon. And that's about right. You could even leave it out if you want, if you're not a big nutmeg fan. Now, I'm just going, you could use a spoon. I'm just going to use my hands here to toss. Make sure you get all that sugar on the apples. And then we're going to do something a little different than I mean, some people do this. What I'm going to do is take all my apples and put it in a strainer. That's why I use such a big bowl. You may wonder why. And then I'm just going to take this and put it over that. And I'm going to cover it. And what I'm going to do is let this sit for an hour or two. The reason I'm doing this, you know, typically if you kind of do this and you put it into your pie pastry and put the top over and bake it, what can happen is as the apples bake, you know, apples are juicy. They have a lot of water, and they will release that water and it'll evaporate. And then what happens a lot of times is the apples shrink and your crust is already set. So you're going to, you know, you can get a really large gap there. So what I do is I let these apples sit like this for an hour or two, and what they do is they release their juices. And so you won't have that problem with the gap. So I'm just going to put this aside. Now, you may say, I don't want to do that because it takes too long. But really, when you think about it, if you do this first, next what we're going to do is to make our pie pastry. And when I have to make it, I have to chill it, and then I have to roll it out. So by the time I do all that, I'll be ready. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clean up. We're going to come back and make our pie pastry. So now for our pastry. I like to use an all butter pastry. I like the flavor and I like how it's nice and crisp. And I actually make my pastry in my food processor. I mean, you could use your like a mixer with the paddle attachment, or really you can even make it by hand, but I've kind of got in the habit of using my food processor. So the first thing you will need is 2 2/3 cups, which is 350 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. Put that in there. Then I have 1 teaspoon, 4 grams. I like to use kosher salt. And then I like to add a little bit of sugar to my pastry. I find it helps with browning and I kind of like the flavor. So I'm adding 2 tablespoons, 30 grams of granulated white sugar. Now, if you prefer to use less sugar or you don't want to use any sugar at all, then that's perfectly fine. Just leave it out. So now I'm just going to mix that together. If you're doing that by hand, you know, just whisk it. And then we're going to add our butter. You will need 1 cup, which is 225 grams. I'm using unsalted butter, and you want to make sure it's nice and cold. And I cut it into these kind of cubes because that's maybe 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. And what I normally do is, you know, in half an hour, or even the day before, I take my butter out, I cut it into the cubes, and I cover it up like with some saran wrap or plastic wrap. And then I put it into the refrigerator so it gets nice and cold, because that's what's going to make our pastry light and crisp and so good. So put that all in here. Now, if you were doing this by hand, you can just you can have a pastry blender and kind of cut it into, or you can just use your fingertips, because we want to kind of make it into coarse crumbs. Having some larger pieces of butter is actually, I kind of like that because it helps with the, make your pastry really nice and crisp. But we don't want to pulse this. I'm just pulsing it, and not for very long, because it just takes like maybe 10 seconds to get it where I want. I'm going to check it just to show you. So I'm going to pulse that just a bit. There's too many lumps. Just to give you an idea, it doesn't take very long. Okay, yeah, that's good. I've got some larger chunks, but it's kind of coarse crumbs now. My hands are all covered. So now what you want, we need some water to bind all that together. I'm just going to scrape this. And you want icy cold water. So I mean, if you have some in the fridge, you can do that. Or what I've done is just put some ice cubes in a glass and then pour my water in. It got nice icy cold. Now, depending how flour, what type of flour and how it was stored, it's hard to say how much water is going to be needed to bind it together. So I'm going to say it can take like as little as maybe 1/4 cup, 80 milliliters, or it could take, up towards that 1/2 cup, 120 milliliters. So we're going to start in the low end. So I'm actually just going to drizzle in, I'm going to say 5 tablespoons, or you could just measure out. And mix that, and then I'll check it, and we'll go from there. If you were doing it by hand, just kind of toss it with a fork or with your fingers to bring it together. Okay, it's starting, so I'm gonna sticks on the side of my food processor and down around the edges. I'm going to give that a feel. You don't want it to become a ball of dough. You want it when you kind of press it, it holds together pretty good. This does, but I think it's a little dry. I'm just going to add, maybe not even, maybe 1/2 tablespoon more. Okay, yeah, see that's what I'm looking for. So, it's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. So now, move everything out of the way here. I'm just going to dump it right on my counter, so I have a clean counter. Although I don't have to tell you that. And then I'm just going to gather it up, and you want to divide it in half. Now you could eyeball it. Just going to bring it, you want to make sure it's all moistened. You don't want to handle it a lot, but you want to make sure it's all the flour's moistened. That looks good. So a scale, if you have a scale, mix it. I mean, you can eyeball it, but why not use your scale? So it's about 335, I'm going to say, roughly. I mean, you don't have to be exact, but that's about the amount for each half. And then, just got a piece of plastic wrap here. I'm going to flatten it into a round, wrap it up, and just put it into the refrigerator to chill. Now, it can take, 30 to say 60 minutes for that to happen. And that kind of just relaxes the gluten in the flour, plus we want it to be firm enough to roll out. So. And then when we come back, we will roll it out. So now that our pastry has chilled nice and firm, we can roll it out. But first, I just want to show you my apples here. It's been about an hour. And as you can see, we've got lots of wonderful apple juices there. So just keep collecting those. I'll show you later what we're going to do with those. Put that aside. So now for our pastry. Unwrap it, and you want to lightly flour your surface. And, you will need a 9-inch, 23-centimeter pie pan. I like to use metal. I like how it browns, especially the bottom crust. But, there's so many different glass, earthenware. I'm going to leave that up to you. It's just my personal preference, but you may have a different one. So now, put your pastry on there and flour the top. your rolling pin. So now we are going to roll this into about a 12-inch round. That's 30 centimeters. You know, when you're rolling your pastry, keep lifting it up and turning it because you don't want it to stick. And if it does start sticking, just, you know, put some more flour down. And if you started, and it started, you know, when you take it out of the fridge and you start to roll it and it really starts cracking, it might be too cold. One, you could just leave it on your counter to warm up a little, or sometimes you can just bang the pastry. That'll soften it too. So, got some frustrations there to let out, you can pound it. And conversely, if you find it's really starting to stick as you're rolling, maybe it's got too warm, and just stop and put it back into the refrigerator to chill a little more. And you know, if you're new to pastry making, it's a bit of a technique. It can be a little frustrating at the beginning, you know, so don't worry. Just kind of patch it, you know, kind of patch it back together and keep rolling. You know, once you assemble your pie and bake it, no one's going to know. And just keep, you know, turning it, rolling it, turning it. And if you find, which a lot of times if you're a beginner, it kind of gets out of shape, it's not around anymore, just kind of go around and, you know, straighten it up. And feel your pastry, because, you know, when you're rolling, you may, and don't roll right off the edges because then it'll get too thin, but, you know, just feel it. And you can kind of tell if maybe the center, which tends to be you don't roll it enough out. So now if you have a trusty ruler, you measure your 12 inches, which I'm almost there. Or you can just kind of take your pie pan and make sure you've got, you know, some room all the way around. I am just going to roll that just a touch more. It's better to have it a little big than not big enough. Okay, I think that's good. So now what I do, I put my rolling pin down. You might want a pastry brush, and if you have too much flour, you can kind of, as you're rolling it up, kind of, so just loosely around. Have your pie pan, put it, roll it over the top. Like so. If you're new to pie baking, you may say, oh, yeah, how come mine didn't do that? I've been doing this for a lot of years. So, you know, be kind to yourself. It may not work out, you know, perfectly. And even if it cracks as you're putting it in, don't worry about it. Just kind of, you can squish it together again and you know, it'll be fine, really. Trust me on that. So I'm just going around, I'm kind of lightly pressing it down, and then to make sure it gets in the corners, like so. And then, let's do that one more time. Looks good. And then I'm just going to flatten it over. Like so. We are going to, like, once we roll, put the top pastry, we're going to tuck it under this bottom. So what you can do, you can kind of, I just take a sharp knife and go around and just, you know, cut, you know, be bold. And just cut off those end pieces. Like so. And that, just press down that, and there it is. And then what we want to do, because we've worked that, we've stretched it, we want to put it, cover it and put it back into the refrigerator to chill, so that, you know, the gluten again has time to relax, because we don't want a lot of, otherwise if you kind of work it too much, you want to let it rest so that it doesn't shrink. And I've already done this because you don't have to watch me again. I just rolled the second pastry out again to a 12-inch, 30-centimeter round. And that's going to be our top crust. And then I just put it on a baking sheet and I've covered that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put both of these back into the refrigerator, you know, maybe a half hour just to chill them. And then that'll be about right for our apples. And then I'll show you what we're going to do with our apples. So now back to our apples. It's been about an hour and a half that these have been draining. So I'm just going to, there. And normally I just put it into the saucepan because we're going to thicken them up a bit, but I'm just going to show you about how much I get. I like to have about a half a cup. That's 120 milliliters of juice. If you didn't have the time to let them sit, long enough to get that much juice, you could add like a little bit of apple juice or apple cider to get that. And think, yeah, I'm a little more than that, so that's perfect. Oh, doesn't that look wonderful? You know, I do this because the other thing is, besides, they release their juices, and so you don't have that gap in pastry. But we're going to add this later back into our apples, and that is going to make our apple filling so tasty. So I'm just going to bring this up to a boil, and then, maybe boil it for a minute or two, just until it thickens just a little. Okay, so that's been boiling a minute or so. I'm just going to take that off the heat. Now we're going to thicken that with some cornstarch. So I have in a bowl here 1.5 tablespoons, which is 15 grams of cornstarch. And then I'm going to add a little water to that. I'll start with a tablespoon. We're going to make what you call like a slurry. And then I'm going to add this into those wonderful apple juices. I mean, I can really smell it. So just to dissolve it, and then we want to whisk, 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 whisk. So, okay. And then I'm going to put this back on the heat and bring it again up to a boil. And I'm just going to boil it maybe for a minute or until the juices here get translucent. So it takes maybe a minute. Okay, so we're almost there. You want to whisk this constantly, and look at that. Oh, I'll just unplug it. Oh, doesn't that look gorgeous? So now, it's really hot, so I'm going to let this cool down a little bit because we are going to fold it into our apple slices. So I'm just now going to dump all those slices in there, and I'm just going to let this cool down for a few minutes, and then we will fold it in. Okay, so now our mixture has cooled down to lukewarm. So I'm going to take it. Kind of looks like caramel, doesn't it? Kind of tastes like caramel. Okay, and mix it in. Once you start doing it this way, I bet you won't go back. And really, when you think about it, we did the filling to begin with, and by the time we do our pastry and get all that ready, it's about the same time. A labor of love, but man, they taste so good. I like to reduce the apple juices and on the stove. I mean, you could do it in the microwave. I just find I like to watch it, and that's why I just do it on the stove top. Okay, so there we have. So took my pie shell out, and what I like to do, because I had flattened it down the rim, I just kind of lift it up a little, because we are going to, our top crust, we're going to fold it under there, make a really, personally, I like a really thick, I love pastry, so I like a really thick outside crust. I mean, you don't have to do it the way, but if you're like me, I like that buttery, crisp pastry. sure you scrape out your bowl and get all of that. Whoop. Okay. And kind of even it out. Some people like it to mound it in the center, but I just like it even all the way across. So, I mean, as good as you can get it, I guess. Oh, doesn't that look wonderful? Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So now, wipe my hands off. Now I have 2 tablespoons of butter, unsalted butter, and then I've just cut it into small cubes, and I'm going to dot the top. Helps with flavor. Let's put that. And you might want to take, you want to make sure that your top crust pastry is not too hard when we put it over top. So, you might have to take it out a few minutes before you take out your bottom crust here, your pastry from the fridge. Because if it's too cold and you try to wrap it, it'll kind of crack on you. So keep that in mind. Okay, that looks good. So I'll show you. You want to kind of, actually mine's really soft, but I'm going to use my rolling pin here. There, that looks pretty good. And just kind of over that. And that. I think I rolled about right. So now, I'm going to take all the excess and kind of tuck it under the lip of the bottom. Like I said, if you don't want a lot, what you can do is just take your knife and just cut it like I did the bottom and really even, but that's a little much. I'm a pastry person. The more the better. If your pastry rips a bit, don't worry about it at this point. It'll be fine. That's a good air, like a vent for the steam to escape. So I kind of, good. There's different ways to do your outside edge. You could just take a fork and press down all the way around. The way I do it is I just take 2 fingers like this and take my other finger, and so I get like that. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but this is my signature style. Good. Looks good. And then you want to do some vents, I call them vents, so that the steam can escape as it bakes. So I'm taking a sharp knife. Now I'm doing about 5, and the slits I'm gonna make them about 2 inches, 5 centimeters. Okay, like so. Now I am going to put this, cover it, and put it back into the refrigerator while we preheat our oven. Now, you want to preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 220 degrees Celsius. If you have an oven where the element is on the bottom, have your rack about the bottom third, because we want to make sure that the bottom crust is really baked through. And what I like to do is, I'm going to, right now, when before I preheat my oven, I'm going to put a baking sheet in the oven too, and that's going to get nice and hot. For a couple things, it helps with to cook the bottom crust, and plus, if it does tend to boil over, then you have a baking sheet for those juices to go on and not, on the bottom of your oven, so you have to clean it. So that's what I'm going to do, and then when we come back, we will bake our pie. So we are ready to bake our pie. What I like to do is brush the top of the pie with an egg wash. So I have a large egg here, or just you have whatever size egg. And I'm just going to add like maybe a teaspoon of water just to break that up. And what that does is it adds a little shine. And plus it helps with browning. Now, if you want to keep this recipe eggless, you could just use some cream instead of the egg wash, or really you don't even have to do this step if you prefer. So I'm just going to take a pastry brush and brush all the pastry. You don't want it too thick, just a nice even coating. You don't want it to like puddle. And then you have places of baked egg. And then if you want, you can take a little either granulated white sugar, or you can even use a sparkling sugar. Just a little over the top. Okay, so now we are ready to go. Everyone's oven is a little different. I'm going to say between 45 and 55 minutes. So you want to check it like, you know, at least at around the 45 just to see how it's going. So what you're looking for is the crust will be a beautiful golden brown, and the way you can tell, a really good way, is the juices will start to, you'll be able to see them bubbling up, bubbling through, I guess, these slits. And if you actually took a sharp knife and kind of inserted it down into the apples, they should be, you know, soft but not mushy. Now, a lot of times what happens, that's quite a long baking time, is especially the outside crust here could get over browned. So what you can do, and I would check at about maybe the 30-minute mark, is you can get like these pie shields and you can just put it like that over your pie if you find that the outside crust is too brown. Another choice is you can just take a piece of foil and kind of make like a long ridge and then just place it like that too. So if you don't want to actually buy one, you could do that. Now, be careful because we have that hot baking pan in the oven, so I am going to put, I don't want to burn my arms here, I am going to put my oven mitts on. So about 45 to 55 minutes. Okay, our apple pie is done. Doesn't it look gorgeous? See, well, stop bubbling, but it's just starting to bubble in the slits. So now, put your baking sheet on a wire rack, and this is the hard part. You can't touch this pie. You can't cut into it. Probably 3 to 4 hours. We want this to cool completely down to room temperature. Because if we tried like in the next, say, half hour to cut into this, what would happen is all the juices would run and they won't thicken. So what you got to do is let it cool, unfortunately, and then those juices will thicken, and then when we slice it, it'll be perfect. So that's what I'm going to do, and then when we come back, we will cut a slice. So now, it's been over 3 hours, so we are ready to cut into our apple pie. You know, you can do a lot of fancy pie crusts, top pie crusts, you know, with the cutouts and the lattice design. But for an old-fashioned apple pie, I don't think you can beat just a solid layer of pastry. So to cut in, you need a sharp knife. And then let's see if first slice is always the hardest, but cook's treat here for me. I'll have the first slice. So it is, I think it's excellent on its own. But of course you can have a scoop of vanilla ice cream, you can have a dollop of whipped cream, or my dad always liked just a slice of a sharp cheddar cheese, but I'm just going to have a plain today. Just enjoy the apple pie as it is. Oh, it just looks so nice with that golden brown crust. I love apple pie. You know, you have that buttery, crisp pastry, top and bottom, so you have lots of pastry. And then the apples. As you can see here, they're soft, but they haven't broken down. They're not mushy. And that's the advantage of using, you know, a firm textured apple. And then the apples I used were a little tart tasting. So, you know, it really, just enough sugar to sweeten them a little, but lots and lots of flavor. Now, you can store your apple pie at room temperature for a couple days, or, you know, I often put it into the refrigerator because then it will last, I find, 3-4 days, and then you can just, what I do is just put a slice on a plate and pop it into the microwave just to warm it up. Really good with vanilla ice cream that way. So you've got to try this. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyabaking.com.